Welcome to a discussion on the control of nuisance animals in the garden and landscape. My name is Phil Radabush. I'm an Extension Master Gardener Volunteer in Buncombe County, North Carolina, a retired veterinarian, and a certified Blue Ridge naturalist through the North Carolina Arboretum. I enjoy talking about nuisance animals in the garden because of my background, longtime interest in gardening, veterinary medicine, and natural history. In this presentation, we'll focus on medium mammals, which I've arbitrarily defined as those mammals that have a typical adult weight of between 5 and 20 pounds. This presentation is part of a series of 9 gardening videos on nuisance animals that also includes information on the other topics that are listed here. If you're having problems with a specific type of animal, you may want to watch one or more of these other videos. All these videos can be found on the Buncombe County Master Gardener website, which is buncombe-mastergardener.org. So let's get started. Today we're going to focus on medium-sized mammals between 5 and 20 pounds. So we're going to talk about the rabbit, the opossum, armadillos, skunks, groundhogs, and the domestic cat. So we're going to start with the rabbit. And in North Carolina, that is, we're mainly dealing with the eastern cottontail rabbits. They are herbivores, and as we all know, they breed prolifically. They will typically breed for as much as 8 months a year from February through September. And they can have as many as 3 to 4 litters per year and 3 to 4 kits in each litter. The young rabbits, though, do have a very high mortality rate, but it just shows you that the rabbit population can proliferate quite rapidly. Rabbits have very sharp incisors on both their upper and lower jaw, and thus they can cause quite a bit of damage to plant material. Rabbits eat a wide variety of plants, including grasses, clover, carrots, lettuce, peas, beans, strawberries, and beets. They can also gnaw on the bark of stems and lower limbs of ornamental plants and fruit and forest trees. They seem to prefer apple, cherry, and plum trees, and raspberries and blackberries. Ornamental plants that are often damaged include sumac, rose bushes, tulip, basswood, dogwood, honey locust, red maple, sugar maple, and willow. Rabbits will chew on young trees, and their girdling usually is several inches above the soil line. Vole damage usually occurs at or below the soil line. You can also sometimes tell that rabbits are around by the type of browse damage that they cause because of those sharp incisors on the upper and lower jaw. When you see a seedling, you'll see that there'll be a very sharp demarcation to the bite area at about a 45-degree angle. On the other hand, deer browse damage, which usually occurs on shrubbery or trees, deer only have incisors on the lower jaw or mandible, and so they really tear rather than having a distinct biting action. I several years ago, seedlings of milkweed that I was going to put out in my pollinator garden. I put my seedlings out, and 2 or 3 days later went out and found that every one of them had been eaten, and the stems had a very distinct, sharp 45-degree angle bite, and I knew that the rabbits had gotten my milkweed seedlings. Management in vegetable gardens, one strategy would be to plant vegetables that appear to be less desirable to rabbits near the edges of the garden. 2 of those are pictured here, cucumbers and tomatoes. They will usually leave. Sweet corn, squash, peppers, potatoes, gourds or pumpkins can also be planted around the edges of the garden, and they seem to be less desirable to rabbits than some of the other garden vegetable crops. Fencing is probably the best strategy. You can use 1-inch wire mesh that's at least 18 to 24 inches high. And that's probably the most successful strategy for vegetable gardens or for individual plants. A 1/4-inch hardware cloth or commercial wraps can be put around the base of trees. Repellents can sometimes be effective for rabbits. Probably the ones that are most effective contain dried blood meal or some other type of dried slaughterhouse waste, which sort of mimics the smell of predators. And if you're more interested in repellent information, there is a separate video that specifically talks about the variety of repellents that are available. And finally, rabbits can be hunted during a legal hunting season. Next, we'll talk about the opossum. Possums are solitary, nocturnal animals that are omnivores. They eat a wide variety of food items. They'll eat carrion, insects, frogs, birds, earthworms. They will sometimes eat fruit and sweet corn. One thing they do is they're very helpful in eliminating ticks from the environment. Ticks are very attracted to them and will stick to their fur or hair. They're very meticulous groomers, and so the opossums will clean those ticks out of their hair coat and eat them. That's probably one of the benefits that they have. However, they can carry and distribute in the environment a bacteria that causes the disease caused leptospirosis. So let me put on my hat as a veterinarian and talk a little bit about leptospirosis. It is a disease that's caused by a bacteria, and it appears to be a re-emerging zoonotic disease. In other words, it's a disease that can be spread commonly from animals to human beings. It does infect a wide variety of mammals, not only a possum, but many other animals that are common in our environment. I found an interesting study in the veterinary literature that was published a couple of years ago. This study was done in California, so don't know if the data would exactly be the same here on the East Coast, but I think it's an interesting set of information to share with you. And what these investigators did is they looked at the incidence of leptospirosis in a variety of what they call peri-urban wildlife. In other words, wildlife in California that were in an area where they might come in frequent contact with human beings. So these are all the different types of animals that they sampled in this study: raccoons, foxes, squirrels, bobcat, coyotes, and skunks. And they looked for leptospirosis in a couple of different ways. It's a bacterial organism that likes to concentrate in the kidneys, and then the bacteria itself is excreted in the urine. So in some cases, if they had the carcass of an animal from a motor vehicle accident or some other reason, they would directly sample the kidneys. In other cases, they had live animals, and they would look for the organism in the urine. When they put all their data together, their final results showed that the overall positive rate for leptospirosis was 23 to 40%, depending on the animal they were looking at and the technique they were using to look for the leptospira organisms. Where this is a potential problem for us is these organisms can infect human beings. They can survive for months in fresh water or wet soil. So if we're gardening in soil where any of these types of wildlife have urinated, we are at potential risk for getting leptospirosis. So that means that if we're gardening outside, we should probably use cloth gloves that can be washed on a regular basis. Gardening with our bare hands, as we've learned in the COVID pandemic, it's really important to have good hand hygiene. So after you've been gardening, whether you use gloves or using bare hands in the soil, please be sure to wash your hands thoroughly with soap and hot water. And that's the best way to cut down on possible transmission of these Leptospira organisms. The armadillo was first reported in North Carolina in 2008, and it's been confirmed, or there have been credible observations throughout the western North Carolina mountains and the southern third of the state. Their biggest problem is they are prolific diggers, and they will destroy turf grass looking for insects, grubs, and other invertebrates. If you see an armadillo, the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission would like that to be reported to them. You can do that at the website ncwildlife.org. And really the only management is either fencing or hunting. Skunks, there are two skunks in our area, the striped skunk and the eastern spotted skunk. The spotted skunk is faster and more agile than the striped skunk, and the spotted skunk is also a very good climber. It's mainly carnivorous, so it eats other small mammals, grubs, and insects, but it will eat sweet corn, grapes, and mulberries. The striped skunk is omnivorous and feeds on a wide variety of vegetative material, as well as insects, grubs, small mammals, eggs of ground nesting birds, and amphibians. The striped skunk is an omnivore, and be the one that most likely might cause problems in the garden or landscape. They are nocturnal. The striped skunk has a good appetite for melons, sweet corn, grapes, and do like a pet food if they have access to pet food that's been left outside. As we'll talk about in a moment, again, skunks are a major vector of rabies. So if you see a skunk out during the day that's acting strange or unusual, be sure to avoid that and report that to the authorities. Management is straightforward. Fencing can sometimes be used for a striped skunk. As said, the eastern spotted skunk is a pretty good climber and may be able to climb over regular fencing. You want to be sure to make pet food, garbage, and animal feed unavailable. Seal ground level openings under building. No repellents appear to be really effective. The striped skunk is a fur-bearing animal, so you can trap it and hunt it with a license. Again, putting on my hat as a veterinarian to show you data on rabies in North Carolina. Again, these are the positive cases that were reported over a 4-year period from 2016 to 2019, and you see that the skunk is the second most common wildlife animal reported with rabies after the raccoon. Skunk odor or skunk essence is due to a sulfur-based compound known as N-butyl mercaptan, and the odor can persist for long periods and is often difficult to neutralize. Again, as a veterinarian, I've seen quite a few dogs over the years that have been exposed to skunk essence. Various products such as tomato juice are purported to remove skunk odor, but I think the following homemade concoction works best for me. It's safe, it's easy to make, it does a good job of neutralizing skunk odor, it's non-toxic, and it breaks down quickly. This recipe really should be for spot removal of skunk odor on animals such as dogs or clothing items that have been sprayed directly by the skunk, and really isn't effective for deodorizing large areas. So the recipe is straightforward. It's 1 quart of hydrogen peroxide, a quarter cup of baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of liquid dish soap. You mix those ingredients in an open pail and apply directly to the sprayed object. That could be a dog, or it could be clothing or some other structure. The solution works best when it's used fresh, and the peroxide and the baking soda form an alkaline peroxide that changes the skunk essence into an odorless chemical. The soap helps break down the oily substances in the essence, and that helps the solution penetrate the fabric and hair. Groundhogs are sun-loving herbivores. They prefer grasses, but they will eat a wide variety of plant material. They have long claws on their front feet, which makes it easy for them to dig in soil. and they create large burrows in pastures, meadows, old fields, woods, and under buildings. And this is a picture of a groundhog in its burrow. Some people feel like the burrows are beneficial for the soil because they will defecate in their burrows, and then the burrows will help aerate the soil. They're mostly vegetarian, and they'll eat grasses, trees, legumes, and a variety of garden vegetables, and they will occasionally gnaw on the bark of ornamental shrubs and fruit trees. If you haven't seen them, I would encourage you to go to YouTube and look at a series of videos on Chunk the groundhog. His family lived underneath the shed in this gentleman's yard and was causing lots of problems in his vegetable garden. And after fighting the groundhog for a period of time, he decided just to learn to live with them. And so he began feeding them, as you can see here, an apple and carrots and lots of other vegetables, and they really became his wildlife pet. The videos are pretty humorous, and so I would encourage you to look at those. They'll also show you the wide variety of vegetative material that groundhogs will consume. Again, management, burrows can be one of the biggest issues. In one way, there are fumigants or toxic gases that can be put in the burrow. Another strategy is to use repellents. Fencing is probably the best way to eliminate groundhog issues. Because they can climb and they're excellent diggers, you need to bury the fence at least a foot deep and make it at least 3 to 4 feet tall. As I mentioned earlier, repellents can sometimes be helpful if used around the entrance to the burrows. One repellent that is purported to be good is to take an old sock or a shirt and douse it in ammonia. Take that ammonia-soaked rag and put it by the entrance or inside the groundhog burrow, and that may cause them to leave, but there's a good chance they'll stay in the area and just to create a burrow in some other location. It's not legal to relocate groundhogs other than on your own property. So if you have a large piece of property, you might be able to live trap them and move them, but it does require a live capture license. Domestic and feral cats are non-native to the United States, and when outdoors, they often kill birds, chipmunks, and other wildlife that feed or nest on the ground. But from a gardening perspective, the biggest issue are cats can also carry the parasite that causes toxoplasmosis. And people are at risk for infection if they work barehanded in the garden soil used by cats as a litter box. Pregnant women or women of childbearing age should always garden with gloves and wash their hands thoroughly if working in soil where outdoor cats are present. So as we talked about, we're preventing leptospirosis. Contaminated soil on the hands can be a risk factor, so we just need to practice good hygiene as we've learned during the COVID pandemic. Wash your hands thoroughly or use cloth gloves or other gloves that can be washed on a regular basis. So hopefully I've given you some tips about how to deal with rabbits, possums, skunks, groundhogs, and cats. If you need additional gardening help or have questions, you can contact in Buncombe County Garden Helpline. It has people available during the active growing season, March through October. You can either call the helpline or visit the extension office in person. Better yet, you can use the email address of buncomemg@gmail.com. You can submit your question that way, and you can also submit pictures of pests or animals or plants or plant diseases that you might have a question about. Thanks for joining me today, and happy gardening.